My name is Caroline Hughes. I'm 53 years old, divorced, and for the better part of the last decade, I've lived a quiet life. I used to believe that love was a one-time thing, that you get your chance and when it ends, that's it. I poured everything into my marriage, into raising my daughter, and when that chapter closed, I didn't expect to open another. I kept to myself. I took care of my garden, walked my dog, made polite small talk with neighbors, and never imagined that life could still surprise me. But it did. And it started with a question I never expected, from someone I never saw coming. I never thought something like this could happen to me. Please, don't make the same mistake I did. It was a Tuesday afternoon when it began. One of those early spring days that tricks you into thinking summer is closer than it is. Sunlight spilling through the trees, warm enough to wear a light sweater, birds making a bit more noise than usual. I was out on my porch, trimming back the wilting potted petunias I'd forgotten to water for a week, when I heard the familiar sound of a basketball bouncing on the driveway next door. Josh. I'd known him since he was a boy. He was my neighbor's son, Shelley's only child. He'd grown up right there beside my own daughter, but the two of them couldn't have been more different. My Emily was the shy, artistic type, always reading or sketching. Josh was athletic, outgoing, the kind of kid who filled a space with his energy. He was away at college now, but I'd seen him coming and going lately. Back for spring break, maybe? That day he was shooting hoops in his driveway, shirtless, his back slick with sweat under the bright sun. I felt silly for noticing, but I did. I looked away quickly, focusing instead on a broken leaf in my hand. "Hey, Miss Hughes," he called out. I looked up, smiling. "Hi, Josh. Back for a little while?" "Yeah, a couple weeks. It's weird being home. Everything feels smaller." He grinned, wiping his forehead with his shirt. "How's life on the porch?" "Peaceful," I said, chuckling. "Predictable. Just the way I like it." He walked over, dribbling the ball under one arm. Up close, I noticed how much he'd changed. His jaw had sharpened, his voice deeper now, and there was a confidence in the way he looked at me that wasn't there before. Still polite, still that boy I remembered, but not a boy anymore. "I always liked it here," he said, glancing at the porch swing. "You've got the best view of the street. Helps me keep an eye on the neighborhood," I joked, then gestured for him to sit if he wanted. He hesitated for half a second, then plopped down next to me, letting the basketball rest at his feet. We talked for a while. Nothing heavy. School, his mom, how my roses were coming in early this year. It felt natural, even easy, like we were old friends catching up. I didn't think much of it until he suddenly got quiet. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said, his tone shifting. I turned toward him. "Sure. What's on your mind?" He stared straight ahead, his hands clasped together, elbows resting on his knees. "Did you ever feel stuck? Like you were living a life that wasn't really yours, just because it was expected?" I blinked, unsure how to answer at first. That wasn't a question I expected from a 21-year-old, not directed at me. "Yes," I said softly. "More than once." He nodded, like that was what he hoped I'd say. Then he looked at me, really looked at me, and asked, "How did you know when it was time to stop pretending?" The air shifted around us, like the breeze itself had gone still. I searched his face, trying to figure out what he was really asking. There was something behind his words, something raw and unguarded. My throat tightened. "I didn't know," I said after a pause. "Not right away. I just got tired. Tired of putting on a smile that didn't belong to me." Josh nodded again, but this time there was a flicker of something in his eyes. "Relief? Sadness?" "I feel that," he whispered. And for a moment, there was nothing but silence between us. No birds, no wind, No sound of passing cars. Just a stillness so thick I could feel my pulse in my ears. I looked down at my hands and then back at him. "You okay, Josh?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I don't know. I guess I see you sitting here every day and you look so peaceful, like you figured something out, and I wanted to know what that felt like." It was then that I realized he wasn't just a neighbor's son anymore. He was a young man grappling with something deep, something unspoken. And somehow, he'd chosen me to ask about it. I felt a pull in my chest. Maternal, maybe, or maybe something else entirely. Something I didn't want to name yet. We sat there for a long time. The sun dipped lower in the sky. He didn't press further, and I didn't ask what he was really going through. But I knew this wasn't the last conversation we'd have. Something had been set in motion, and I could feel the weight of it in my bones. And as he stood up to go back inside, he paused on the steps. "Thanks, Miss Hughes. For not pretending." I watched him walk away, heart pounding harder than it should have been. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying our conversation over and over in my mind. It wasn't just what he said. It was how it made me feel. The next morning, I found myself lingering at the kitchen window, coffee in hand, eyes drifting toward the house next door. I wasn't proud of it. It felt silly, almost juvenile, the way I was waiting, hoping for another glimpse of Josh. But there I was, staring out at the quiet driveway like it might suddenly come to life and offer me some kind of answer. I'd been through a lot in my life. A divorce that drained me. A daughter who grew up and moved away. Years of silence in a house that used to be filled with noise and purpose. I thought I had finally made peace with solitude. But after yesterday, I didn't know anymore. I didn't see Josh that morning, or the next. I told myself it was for the best. Whatever had passed between us on that porch, it didn't need to go further. He was young, so young, and I was probably reading too much into a simple, heartfelt conversation. Still, I couldn't forget the way he'd looked at me, like he was seeing something I'd long stopped believing was there. 3 days later, I was carrying groceries from my car when I heard the gate creak open. I turned, and there he was, standing at the edge of my yard with a hesitant smile. "Need a hand?" he asked. I smiled despite myself. "Sure. If you're offering." He jogged over, took 2 of the heavier bags without asking, and followed me inside. My heart did a strange little dance at the sound of his footsteps in my house, a house that rarely hosted anyone these days. "Wow," he said as he looked around the kitchen. "Still smells like cinnamon in here, just like I remember." "That's because I still use the same candle," I said, setting my keys down. "Some things don't change." He laughed softly and placed the bags on the counter. "Some things probably shouldn't." There was something different in his voice, more grounded, more deliberate. He seemed calmer than before, but also more intense, like he'd made some decision since we last talked. "I've been thinking about what you said," he said suddenly. "About pretending." I turned to face him, surprised. "Yeah?" He nodded. "It's been eating at me. I'm not sure if I've ever really been myself. At school, with my mom, with everyone. I always thought I had to be this version of me people expected." I leaned against the counter, watching him carefully. "That's not unusual, Josh. Most people your age are still figuring that out." He took a step closer. "But what about people your age?" I smiled softly. "We're still figuring it out too." He laughed, then looked down at the floor. "It's strange, but I feel like I can tell you things I can't tell anyone else. You don't judge me. You just listen." "I try," I said. "Most people don't really want advice. They just want someone to hear them." He met my eyes again. And I feel like you hear me. The air grew still, just like it had that day on the porch. But this time it felt warmer. Like the space between us was charged with something neither of us could name, but both of us could feel. I need to ask you something, he said, stepping even closer. I didn't move. My heart was thumping loud in my chest. Go ahead. He hesitated, eyes flicking to my mouth for the briefest moment before returning to mine. Why did you never remarry? I wasn't expecting that. It knocked the breath from my lungs more than anything else he could have said. I let out a quiet breath and looked away. Because I didn't want to choose someone just to fill a space. I wanted to feel something real. And after the divorce, I stopped believing that was possible. Do you still think that? He asked gently. I looked back at him, and for a moment I saw not a neighbor's son, not a college kid, but a man. One searching for meaning, maybe even the same kind I'd been missing for years. I don't know, I admitted, but lately I've started to wonder. He didn't say anything after that, just looked at me like he wanted to say more but didn't want to cross a line. Eventually I broke the silence. Would you like some tea? He smiled. I'd like that. We sat at the kitchen table, talking about everything and nothing. Music, movies, how he missed his dad even though they rarely spoke. I told him about my daughter's latest painting and how I couldn't bring myself to hang it because it reminded me of the quiet in her old room. There were no grand confessions that night. No lines crossed. But something changed between us, subtle, unspoken, and deeply felt. When he left, he stood in the doorway for a long moment, then turned to me. Caroline, he said, using my first name for the first time, you make me feel like I'm not invisible. I didn't know what to say to that. My throat was tight, my chest full. You're not, I whispered. You never were. He smiled, gave a small nod, and walked back into the night. I stood there in the doorway, the cool air brushing my skin, and wondered what exactly was happening between us, and whether I was ready for where it might lead. A few days passed. I told myself I needed space to think, to clear my head, to return to the rhythms of my life before Josh started showing up in unexpected places and asking questions that dug beneath layers I hadn't touched in years. I went about my errands, cleaned the house twice over, even reorganized my spice rack. Anything to keep my mind from drifting back to him. But it didn't work. His voice lingered. That last thing he said, you make me feel like I'm not invisible, echoed louder in the quiet moments. It reminded me of something I had long forgotten, how it feels to be seen. Not as someone's mother, not as an ex-wife, not as the polite woman next door with the tidy porch and cinnamon candles, but me. Caroline. The woman behind all the titles. It was Saturday evening when I saw him again. I was watering the rose bushes out back, dressed in old jeans and one of my ex-husband's flannel shirts I still wore for yard work. The sky had started to dim, painted in pink and amber streaks. I heard the soft click of the gate before I turned around. Josh stood there, one hand on the fence, a half smile on his face. I knocked, he said, but I guess you didn't hear. I set the hose down, heart doing that familiar flutter again. Didn't expect visitors. I brought something, he said, lifting a paper bag. My mom's lemon bars. Thought you might want company. I hesitated, just long enough for him to notice. If it's too much. No. I cut in. It's not. Come in. We sat on the old bench under the maple tree, the one my husband built years ago when things still felt whole. I hadn't sat there with anyone since. Josh opened the bag and passed me a bar. We ate quietly for a while, the distant hum of cicadas filling the silence. I should be leaving soon, he said after a while. Back to school. I nodded, unsure what to say. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt something close to loss. You've given me a lot to think about, he added. Oh. He looked down at his hands. You've lived a life. You've made mistakes. And you still sit on your porch every day and smile at strangers. That's hopeful. I chuckled softly. You think smiling means I'm okay? He looked at me, serious now. No. I think it means you choose to be okay. There's a difference. I studied him. The boy I once knew now eclipsed by the man in front of me. There was a strength in his vulnerability, a quiet kind of courage I wasn't expecting at his age. He turned toward me, eyes steady. I want to ask you one more thing. My stomach tightened. All right. Have you ever felt something for someone you weren't supposed to? My breath caught. I didn't answer right away. I let the wind move through the branches above us. I let the question sit between us, heavy and real. Yes, I said finally. He swallowed. And what did you do? I turned to him, my voice barely above a whisper. I buried it. I told myself it didn't matter, that it couldn't. He nodded slowly. Is that what you're doing now? His question hung there, trembling in the air. I looked at him. Really looked. The slope of his shoulders, the way his knee bounced nervously, the tenderness in his eyes. I don't know what this is, Josh, I said, my voice wavering. I don't know if it's real or just the echo of two people feeling lonely at the same time. I don't feel lonely when I'm with you, he said. Neither did I. And that terrified me more than I could admit. He reached out gently, covering my hand with his. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready for, he said. But I need you to know you changed something in me. You showed me what honesty looks like, what connection feels like. Tears welled in my eyes before I could stop them. You're young, I whispered. You have your whole life ahead of you. And you're not done living yours, he replied. I couldn't argue with that. Not when I felt more alive in that moment than I had in years. We sat there as the stars began to appear, his hand resting lightly over mine. No kisses, no rushed confessions, just the quiet promise of something unspoken and tender blooming between us. When he finally stood to leave, he paused beside me. I'll see you before I go. Yes, I said, my voice soft. I'd like that. After he left, I stayed on that bench until the sky turned completely dark. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel alone. I felt seen, and maybe, just maybe, willing to be seen again. The morning of his departure arrived quietly, without fanfare. I had barely slept the night before. I told myself I was being foolish, that all this, the glances, the conversations, the soft lingering of his hand over mine, was nothing more than a fleeting spark in an otherwise ordinary life. But deep down I knew better. There are moments in life when something shifts, when what once seemed impossible begins to feel inevitable. I stood on my porch, arms crossed over my sweater, watching the driveway next door. Josh's car was packed, suitcase in the trunk, a few worn notebooks on the passenger seat. His mother wasn't around, probably said her goodbyes earlier. He stepped out of the house and stopped when he saw me. For a moment, we both just stood there, sunlight washing the space between us. Then he walked over, slow and purposeful. I wasn't sure if I should knock, he said. I wasn't sure if I wanted you to, I replied. He laughed softly, a little sad, a little knowing. So what happens now? I looked at him, this young man who had managed to stir something in me I thought had long since gone still, and not with grand gestures or wild declarations, but with kindness, with honesty, with the kind of presence that makes you feel like your words matter again. I don't know, I said, but I'm glad it happened. All of it. He nodded. Me too. There was silence again. That heavy, beautiful kind that doesn't beg to be filled. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small folded piece of paper. I raised an eyebrow. What is it? Just something I wrote for when you're sitting on the porch and I'm not around. I unfolded the note carefully. It was written in his slanted, hurried handwriting. You reminded me that it's okay to feel, to not have it all figured out. Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. I felt my chest tighten. I clutched the note, blinking hard to fight off the warmth rising in my eyes. I didn't do anything special, I whispered. You did more than you know, he said. And maybe one day, when the timing is less complicated. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I'll be here, I said simply. Not waiting, but here. He smiled, then really smiled, and stepped forward. He leaned down and kissed my cheek, slow and soft, his hand brushing my shoulder like a goodbye and a thank you all in one. And just like that, he turned, walked down the steps, and drove away. I stood there long after his car disappeared, clutching that note to my chest. There was no music swelling in the background. No cinematic ending. Just the breeze, the creak of the porch swing, and a heart quietly waking up again. Later that evening, I sat out back with a cup of tea, the note resting beside me. The sun dipped behind the trees, painting the yard in gold and shadow. And I realized something. Life doesn't always give you neat conclusions. Sometimes it gives you a glimpse, a spark, a reminder that your story isn't over, even if the pages have sat untouched for a while.